This reading is a parallel commentary on the Bible and the Bhagavad Gita, written by Swami Kriyananda. Truth is one and eternal. Realize oneness with it in your deathless self within. The following commentary is based on the teachings of Paramhansa Yogananda. This reading from the Bhagavad Gita, the commentary is titled, Who Truly Glorifies God? This passage from the Gita is from the 10th chapter. I am the source of everything. From me all creation emerges. Blessed with this realization, the wise, awe-stricken, adore me. This passage offers a striking contrast between true spiritual wisdom and the conceit of the worldly, so-called wise. Those who think themselves wise in the ways of the world look upon every event, no matter how startling to others, with a bored sense of its inevitability. One who imagines that he has seen everything ends up marveling at nothing. Familiarity reduces even the greatest marvels to insignificance. He is like those guides at the Great Pyramids who share none of the wonder tourists feel on beholding those amazing structures for the first time. In the religious life also, as long as one's dedication is merely outward, the initial enthusiasm one feels in the thought of living for God cannot but diminish in time. The novice's mood changes by subtle degrees to one of hopeful, if slightly discouraged, affirmation. As further years pass, he assumes an attitude of plodding determination. Finally, he ends up mechanically repeating the prescribed prayer formulae, while his mind wanders fretfully through byways of private projects and preoccupations. In monasteries, the older monks and nuns often look on the religious fervor of novices with a certain wistfulness. Sadder still is it to see certain ones among them regarding beginners with condescension. In their imagined superiority, born, one presumes, of their smug satisfaction in the fact that they haven't yet died. That's a joke. They reveal how completely they have lost the freshness of their own first inspiration. The Bhagavad Gita is suggesting that the spiritual life, when lived as it should be, brings a continuously increasing sense of inner contentment, calmness, and joy. Spiritually wise alone are they who realize God's presence in their souls. Religion, for these rare souls, means much more than an intellectual system of dogmas, much more than mechanically repeated ceremonies. It means establishing a creative, living relationship with God. Those who are truly wise do not limit their spiritual life to vicarious perceptions of truth through reading the scriptures. They live constantly in the inner, direct experience of the Lord's light and love. The great Indian master Sri Ramakrishna often laughed while recollecting a certain Hindu priest he had heard urging a congregation to greater devotion by crying, "God is dry, you must sweeten him with your heart's devotion." Where, indeed, demanded Ramakrishna, does our very power to love him come from, if not from God, the source of love itself? A mistake often made in religion is the tendency to think that whatever inspiration we may feel in the act of worship derives entirely from worshipful attitudes in ourselves. Too much attention to outward practices diverts people from the thought of giving God a chance to speak inwardly to their souls. The practice of inner communion is essential if religion is merely to hold the sincere interest of devotees and not to become another habit much like eating or sleeping. Here in the Bhagavad Gita, however, we find that inner communion accomplishes much more. Not only does it awaken the devotee to a life of sincere dedication, it leads him to ever fresher experiences of divine joy. It is natural for beginners on the spiritual path, if they are dedicated, to feel enthusiasm. Those, by contrast, who are advanced on the path, the saints, pass far beyond the tumults of such self-generated enthusiasm. They become, quote, awe-stricken. These people alone can truly, quote, adore, where others at best can only praise. And this commentary from the Bible is entitled Abiding in God. And the word abiding, in this sense, you could think of it as, it's an older word, but think of it in the sense of attuning or attunement. Yogananda often emphasized, more often to his disciples than to the general public, but also to everyone generally, for it was a universal teaching, the importance of attunement. For divine understanding cannot be created, it must be perceived. To the disciples, Yogananda spoke of the importance of attunement with the Guru. To others, he urged the importance at least of attuning oneself to higher consciousness. Can an eagle rise without support from the sustaining air? Jesus Christ said in the Gospel of St. John, I am the vine, ye are the branches. He that abideth in me, and I in him, the same bringeth forth much fruit, for without me ye can do nothing. If a man abide not in me, he is cast forth as a branch, and is withered, and men gather them, and cast them into the fire, and they are burned. If ye abide in me, and my words abide in you, ye shall ask what ye will, and it shall be done unto you. Herein is my Father glorified, that ye bear much fruit. So shall ye be my disciples. How can we, quote, abide in him? Jesus says, if my words abide in you. By words he meant not only his spoken words, but his vibrations, his consciousness, of which the words are only an expression. We must abide by the teachings, but we must also absorb those teachings into ourselves, that they become our own experience. For disciples of this path, the more in their hearts they live consciously in the presence of the Masters, the more they will find the divine presence living within them. And for all truth seekers, whether disciples or not, the more they live sustained inwardly by the awareness of God's presence, the higher they will find themselves soaring in wisdom and joy. Thus, through Holy Scripture, God has spoken to mankind. Om, Om, Om.
Good morning, everyone. So nice to see you all. This reading is just so beautiful. Of course, all of them are. And here, I'll just grab this. Thanks. Is this on? Yeah. You know, when you read truth, it's so amazing. Master wrote so much. We're so blessed by that. And Swamiji wrote so much. It's so nice to read something and know that it is true and feel that it is true and trust that it is true. In that, every word is infused with truth. Every word is just so beautiful. And so as you read it, you can feel the consciousness imbibed in each and every word. When Master and Swamiji wrote, they wrote from a very high consciousness. Master went into samadhi every time he wrote, whether it was music or words, he was in samadhi. And so when we are reading these words, the words themselves infused with this consciousness is helping us to uplift our consciousness as well. So we have videos which uplift our consciousness, but we also have the words, the reading of the words. Just even reading one paragraph of the words can be so uplifting. You might want to think about keeping Essence of the Bhagavad Gita next to your bed and just reading one paragraph before you go to sleep every night. Essence of the Bhagavad Gita is Yoganandaji's interpretations of the Gita as Swamiji wrote it from memory of everything that Master had said. So just to remind us, there's a few paragraphs in this that are just really wonderful. One, in the religious life also, as long as one's dedication is merely outward, the initial enthusiasm one feels in the thought of living for God cannot but diminish in time. The novice's mood changes by subtle degrees to one of hopeful, if slightly discouraged, affirmation. As further years pass, he assumes an attitude of plodding determination, like, Finally, he ends up mechanically repeating the prescribed prayer formula while his mind wanders fretfully through byways of private projects and preoccupations. Just really amazing. I remember when I lived in one of our communities, and I've lived in a number of them, when I was younger in one of them, I remember the older people would say, "Oh, that person's going through their honeymoon on the spiritual path." And I remember thinking, well, I've been on the path for a while and I don't feel it was just a honeymoon, but, maybe it'll wear off or something. And then the Acharya in charge caught on that people were saying this in kind of a sarcastic tone. Someone would come in bright-eyed and bushy-tailed and read the paths, and, well, that's not what Master said, and that's not what Swamiji says, like wanting to discuss it, but just having that enthusiasm you have in the beginning, which I'll go into more later. And so the Acharya heard this and said, now wait a minute. This is not the right attitude to be saying in such a sarcastic attitude the honeymoon phase. That every day on the spiritual path is really a honeymoon. And that if you are living this path correctly, the enthusiasm increases. But it increases as it deepens. So the newcomer, which can be 5 to 10 years, reads the words and then lives by them outwardly, meaning I've read these wonderful words. Master said to do this, Master said to do that. I will do this, I will do that. But then Swamiji wrote, which is just... He said, we must abide by the teachings, but we must also absorb those teachings into ourselves, that they become our own consciousness. For disciples of this path, the more in their hearts they live consciously in the presence of the Masters, the more they will find the divine presence living within. So I want to talk about the word absorb. And he talks about attunement. Swamiji said Master talked about attunement to especially the close disciples. And attunement and absorb is similar. Attunement is tuning into the vibration. But we're not just tuning in mentally to the vibration. We are taking that vibration in to us. We are absorbing that vibration. When we learn these teachings, in the beginning, we read them, we mentally understand them, but the only way that we can deepen, the only way that we can understand and perceive on a deeper level is if we absorb it. And so what is that absorption? Contemplate for yourself this week, what is my way of absorbing things? Everybody's going to absorb differently. I remember when I first read the autobiography of a yogi, and I felt like something was happening while I was reading this book. Something deep was happening. I felt like I was absorbing the book. I wasn't just reading it and finding it mentally satisfying. I felt as though that book had something that it was giving to me, and every time I was in Swamiji's presence, I felt that a vibration was coming into me. And so this absorbing, even if you're in, suppose, the Raja Yoga class and you're reading the wonderful Raja Yoga book, it's so easy to just read that book mentally and say, oh, this is excellent philosophy, this is great philosophy. But if we don't absorb it and make it our own and begin to express ourselves in our special way on this path, that absorption, you're absorbing when you are changing. When you have been changed, you have absorbed. When you are just mentally understanding, you don't change. So many who have read the autobiography of a book changed after they read that book. That inner fire that makes us want to go towards God was lit or reminded to be lit. And so that means we absorbed that vibration and it changed us. That is absorption. When you just read something, I remember before this path, I would read something intellectual and think, aha, beautiful philosophy. My mind can wrap around this complex thing, this complex concept. And it was like mentally refreshing. I am refreshed now mentally because I didn't have an open heart and I wasn't capable of feeling very much. And so I didn't change. I would try and squeeze inspiration out of an intellectual concept. And that is not what a Jnana Yogi does either. A Jnana Yogi has heart also. So when the Jnana Yogi is reading scripture, he may be tuning to it somewhat in an intellectual way, but really in a way of wisdom. So that is different than when we are attuning to something just mentally and it feels so great. What wonderful words that Master wrote. These make so much sense. But our heart is closed, and so we don't change. We have not absorbed it yet. We have not made it our own yet. And it is natural to absorb, especially in this year while you're pursuing Kriya. That first year, it's like throwing this concept, throwing that concept, throwing this, throwing that. Here's what Master thinks about karma and reincarnation. Here's what Master thinks about this. Here's what Master thinks about that. And it all makes sense. And so wonderful. We feel a resonance. We feel, yes, okay, this is it. And yet, we haven't digested it yet. And there's something called spiritual indigestion. When so many concepts are thrown at us that we just can't take any more. And so after a while, when all of these things come to us, sooner or later we must digest them. And that is part of the absorption process. It all sounds like digestion. Physical digestion, absorption. And so then suddenly we not only see the truth and understand the truth, we feel the truth. Suddenly we feel the truth behind the words. Suddenly, with the aid of Kriya Yoga especially, we find ourselves opening up. We find the heart opening. And with the heart opening, we find that we do begin to absorb. The thing we're absorbing the most is the vibration of the Guru. We may be absorbing mental concepts into ourselves that become our own truths, but truly the ultimate absorption is the Guru. And that is what attunement is also. So when we are attuning to the Guru, we are bringing him into ourselves. He is of us. We are of him. And the more we resonate with his frequency, the more we become him. The more we begin to merge with him. And the concept of the Guru is our raft to salvation. The Guru is that vibration that takes us back to God when we die. The Guru is that constant presence we have in our life that takes us home. And so the more we can absorb, just take a look at life. If you feel like you're stuck or stale, then you're not absorbing. If you feel as though you do change, if you are changing, then you're absorbing. Think of it in these terms, this absorption process. So many people, especially, when you're newer, it's all this mental concept. You might know you should be kind to people. You might know that the heart should be open. You might know that you should love God. But then when you start behaving kindly towards others, when you start loving God, when you start opening the heart and feeling, then that means you have absorbed something and now it is part of you. When you begin practicing it, then there's an even deeper step, which is where you are not practicing it like everyone else. You're practicing it in your own way, not egoically own way, but as a manifestation of God. Each one of us are different manifestations of God. And so we become our own flower, our own lotus. There's, 30 lotuses in this room that all have their own color and fragrance. Each lotus, it's very important to value yourself and your expression. Not like we walk around and say, I am expressing myself now. That's the opposite of the spiritual path in some ways. But God will come up to us in our own way. In the beginning, we compare ourselves to others. We say, oh, they must be deeper than I am, or I'm deeper than they are. And we see others and we compare our inside to their outside. And we wish we were different than what we are. We wish we could be more like them or less like them, or thank God I'm not like them. And then over time, that's called being outwardly identified. That means we are comparing ourselves outwardly. And as long as we do that, it's very difficult to express your own spiritual nature. But once you stop comparing and judging, then you give yourself space to be who you are. And we were talking about this in class yesterday, where, very often on the spiritual path, we wish we had this spiritual experience or that spiritual experience. I wish I had this spiritual experience, rather than the spiritual experience we're being given right now. the spiritual experience we are experiencing inside that is unlike anybody else's. And if we continuously wish it to be something else, we're missing out on what it is inside. And that's a waste. And so we want to stop that comparing, stop that judging, stop that wishing for things to be other than they are, and instead begin to appreciate what is there and begin to absorb and dive more deeply and feel what is happening in me now. And not discount something you would judge as a small experience. Because something that seems like a small experience might actually be a big experience, and we just don't have the patience or the time to see it that way. Instead, we want to be, no, I was in cosmic consciousness reading someone's mind, or I was, sitting over in the corner in samadhi, or I was levitating, or, I want to do something that seems significant, but we have no idea what it's like for our own personal unification with God is going to look like. We have no clue. The only place we can start with is inside, with that experience you have, not anybody else. With that message God has given you, not anyone else. We want to feel special, so we may talk about these experiences, and then other people are thinking, oh, I didn't have that experience. But who cares? Each of us, as long as we're absorbing, are moving forward on the path and growing. And that's what counts the most. It doesn't matter how we're growing compared to other people growing. If we had divine vision, where we could see all the past lives and all the work we've done in the past lives, then we could have the judgment of, well, I've been doing this for 1 million years, and you've only been doing it for 900,000 years. And so therefore I know I'm more advanced because I had this many vrittis that I got rid of, and I only have this many vrittis left. But we don't have that ability to do that, do we? We have no idea. And just so you know, we love to say, if you're new on this path, you aren't new. You have done this before. You're just getting back on the path. And it doesn't matter how old you are or how young you are, you're doing it at the time your soul told you to do it. You got an awakening call. You were given that moment of the autobiography, or a friend said, come to this class when you didn't want to, or your wife dragged you, or your husband dragged you, whatever it was, that was the beginning of the magic moment of when the awakening was beginning, the reawakening in this life. We are only being reawakened. And so we are just trying to, it's as though we're on a freight train, or a freight train is coming by representing what we've been doing on the spiritual path, and we get awakened and we then grab a hold of the train and it just takes us forward. Again, same train, but we've grabbed a hold of it and now we're being taken forward on it. So just remember, each and every person is precious. Each and every soul is precious. And each and every spiritual experience, whether it's just the feeling of peace or some inner joy, whatever it is, that is precious. And it's yours. And it's between you and God. And the more we cultivate whatever is happening between ourselves and God, the more that will grow. Swamiji said something very nice. He said, every time we have a spiritual experience. Now remember, I'm not talking wowie zowie experiences. I'm just talking perceiving something. Perceiving divine love inside. Perceiving a deep peace there for no reason. Perceiving a joy for no reason. Perceiving wisdom that comes to us out of nowhere, or maybe in answer to a prayer. These things are spiritual experiences. So Swamiji said, every time we have a spiritual experience, our awareness or ability to perceive is increased. It's as though spiritual perception is a muscle. And every time we perceive our own experience, I don't mean imagination, I don't mean fantasy. You know, I saw Shiva on the mountaintop, and he came to me and he told me I'm the highest soul in the room. You know, he came to me and told me I'm special and should, lead people to salvation. Not imagination, not fantasy. That's nothing. That is mental something. But it is only living in the mind. It is not living in the heart. And so perception is in the heart. So when we perceive, every time we perceive that little bubble of peace, that little bubble of joy, our perception ability is increased. So we want to really work on that. Let's begin perceiving more and more for ourselves and increasing that ability to perceive, because the end of that rainbow of perception is bliss. A deep bliss that takes your breath away, that gets you in tune with Divine Mother. Her presence is so strong, always. And so try and tune into that bliss. And your meditations will go deeper and deeper. We are so blessed to have Kriya Yoga, because it is a surefire way to awaken our hearts. And it's okay if the hearts aren't completely open. Just try and get a crack in there. Try and crack it open just a little bit. One thing that can help is think of a time, even if it's when you were very young, when your mother loved you so much, or when you loved your little pet kitty, or your younger brother or sister. Remember that time when you were able to love. Maybe it was just yesterday when your heart was full of love, but whatever it is, remember those times and begin to re-experience that love. Humans are around each other to practice divine love with each other. And then, after a while, that divine love, you are loving God. You're loving the Guru. That love is being sent up to the Guru. And then a deep, deep love comes back to us. And then a deep, deep bliss comes back to us. And it's inevitable for all of us that we will get to this point. But don't be thinking when or how. Just allow that inner fire that is there, whether you know it or not, to motivate you. Because if you're unconscious, that inner fire which is the divine flame, wants to merge back with the bigger divine. It wants that. That's without our ego wanting it at all. Then we become aware of that, and we begin doing things like Kriya Yoga and meditating and practicing divine love and things like that. And so then we align ourselves with that divine flame that is trying to re-merge with the divine. All of us are doing that. Everyone in this room has worked so hard. Every single one of us will experience that. So, but it doesn't matter. The thing we shouldn't get caught up is when. Because now you can experience something. And that's all that matters. Don't be thinking about when I'll be able to levitate. Think instead, now, what am I feeling? What is in my heart? And if it has to start small, start small. But whatever that is, start there. And it will take you far.